It's July 1518 in the city of Strasbourg. A woman steps out of her house and begins to dance in the street. There is no music, no festival, no reason anyone can see, and she does not stop. Not that night, not the next morning, not the day after. Her feet blister and bleed. Her body sags with exhaustion, and still she dances, as though something has taken hold of her that she cannot switch off. Within a week, dozens of others have joined her. Within a month, there are hundreds, and some of them will dance until their hearts give out. This really happened. It is one of the strangest true events our species has ever written down, and to this day, no one is entirely certain why it began. A quick warning before we go further. This story is disturbing, and every word of it is true. The people of Strasbourg lived through it. The city clerks recorded it in their ledgers. Physicians were summoned to explain it, and priests to pray it away. And the harder anyone tried to stop it, the worse it grew. What follows is the true story of the dancing plague of 1518, and the unsettling answer historians have circled ever since. It began with a single person. Her name comes down to us as Frau Troffea. One ordinary summer day, she stepped into a narrow lane and started to move, alone, silent, as if pulled by something no one else could hear. Her neighbors laughed at first. Her own husband, the records suggest, was more embarrassed than afraid, but the laughter faded as the hours stretched into evening, and she would not, or could not, stop. She danced into the night. She danced through the next day, and the day after that. By some accounts, she kept moving for the better part of a week, dropping only to sleep before rising to begin again, her shoes soaked through. And here is the part that turns a strange event into a genuine mystery. It spread. Within days, 30 or 40 others were dancing beside her. Within a few weeks, the number had climbed toward 400, which raises the obvious impossible question: how does one woman dancing silently in a lane become an entire crowd of people who cannot stop? To stand in Strasbourg that summer would have been to witness something out of a nightmare. Picture the narrow streets filling with bodies that swayed and jerked and turned, hour after hour, with no music to carry them and no joy in their faces. Many wore blank, faraway expressions, as though they were somewhere else entirely. Their feet were bruised and bleeding. Some had torn their shoes to ribbons and danced on the bare cobblestones. Onlookers crowded the edges of the squares, some praying, some weeping, some simply staring at neighbors and strangers who had, almost overnight, become something they could not understand. And still, each day, a few more would drift in from the crowd and begin to move, as though the dancing itself were reaching out and pulling them under. The city's leaders turned to the physicians of the day for an answer, and their conclusion is almost harder to believe than the plague itself. They examined the afflicted, ruled out the influence of the stars, ruled out the punishment of sin, and declared this a natural sickness, an overheating of the blood. And from that diagnosis came a catastrophic idea. If the fever was in the blood, and the body needed to work it loose, then the cure was not to stop the dancing at all. The cure was to let them finish it. So the authorities did something extraordinary. They did not restrain the dancers. They cleared out 2 of the city's guild halls to give them room. They set aside space in the open markets. They built a wooden stage. And then they hired musicians, pipers, and drummers to play alongside the afflicted, and even brought in strong, healthy men to take the failing dancers by the arms and keep them upright and moving when their own legs gave out. The theory was simple: dance the sickness out of them, and the city would be free of it. You can already sense how badly this went. But hold that image: a city hiring a band and paid men to cure a plague of dancing. Because what that music actually did tells you almost everything about what this plague truly was. If the forgotten corners of our own history keep pulling you in like this, take a second to subscribe. Digging up the strangest true stories our species has left behind is the entire reason this channel exists. And stay with this one, because the moment we reach the real explanation, the whole thing stops feeling like a distant medieval curiosity. The music did not cure them. It called more people in. As the drums and pipes echoed through the squares, the crowd swelled instead of shrinking. new bodies drawn helplessly into the rhythm day after day. According to the chronicles, at the height of it, people were dropping in the streets. From strokes, from heart attacks, from the sheer exhaustion of days without rest. One account claims that at its worst, as many as 15 people were dying every day. How many truly perished is something historians still argue over. And those old numbers may well have swollen with every retelling, so we should hold them loosely. But that people danced themselves into the ground, and that some of them never rose again, the records broadly agree. Eventually, the authorities grasped their terrible mistake. The stage came down, the music was silenced, and public dancing was banned outright, and the afflicted were gathered up and carried out of the city, up into the hills to a shrine of Saint Vitus, where they were led through a ritual of absolution, given small red shoes, walked before a wooden image of the saint, and blessed in the hope that the curse might finally lift. And slowly, as the summer burned itself out, the dancing did stop. So what on earth could do this to a city? For a long time, the favorite suspect has been poison, and it is worth treating this like the mystery it truly is, and putting that suspect properly on trial. A fungus called ergot grows on damp rye, and when it is milled into flour and baked into bread, it can cause violent convulsions, a burning pain in the limbs, and vivid hallucinations, an affliction once known as St. Anthony's fire. At first, it seems to fit the crime perfectly. Bad bread, a poisoned town, bodies thrown into spasms. But the case falls apart the moment you look closely. That same poison strangles the blood flow to the arms and legs. Its victims often lose fingers and toes to gangrene and can barely stand, let alone dance in rhythm for days on end across a whole city. And there is a harder problem still. An entire community would have eaten from the same grain, yet only some of them danced, while their own families stood by and watched. Poison in the bread cannot explain who it chose, or why it spread the way a rumor spreads. Leaping from one frightened person to the next, the bread is not our answer, which leaves an explanation stranger, and in its own way far more frightening than any poison. The historian John Waller, who has studied this event as closely as anyone, argues that the dancing plague was a case of mass psychogenic illness, what an older age would have called mass hysteria. Not a disease of the body at all, but of the mind, moving from person to person through fear. To understand how that could happen, you have to stand inside Strasbourg in 1518. These were desperate years. The harvests had failed, and grain prices had soared. Famine gnawed at the poor. Disease crowded in close behind it. And over all of it hung a very particular dread, because the people of that region believed in a saint, Saint Vitus, who was said to hold the power to curse sinners with a wild, unstoppable dance. Now take a population that is already starving, already terrified, and already primed to believe that heaven itself might strike them down with this exact affliction. One woman falling into a trance-like dance could be the single spark, and every new dancer who joined made the curse look more real, more contagious, more undeniable to the next anxious mind that witnessed it. That is why the musicians made everything worse. They did not burn the sickness away. They advertised it. They turned one woman's private torment into a public spectacle that every frightened soul in the city could see and fear and fall into. And here is the detail that should stay with you. Strasbourg was not the only time this happened. Outbreaks of compulsive, spreading, sometimes deadly dancing were recorded again and again across medieval Europe. One of the largest struck in 1374, sweeping down the towns along the River Rhine, through Aachen, through Cologne, and far beyond, where crowds danced through the streets for days on end, some crying out that they saw terrible visions, some begging to be released from it. There are older and stranger records still, of whole groups who danced from one town to the next until they finally dropped. This was not a single freak accident. It was a pattern, something the human mind, under enough pressure, has done over and over again. That is what makes the dancing plague so much more than a curiosity. It is not a story about people who were poisoned, or foolish, or fundamentally different from us. It is a story about how thin the wall really is between the mind and the body, and how, under exactly the right pressure, A single shared fear can move through a crowd like fire and take on a life of its own. Our ancestors were not weaker than we are. They were simply human, in a moment when being human turned against them. So we will leave you with the same question the physicians of Strasbourg never truly answered. What do you think set those hundreds of people dancing? Something in the bread, or something in the mind? Tell us what you believe in the comments.